The sun had barely risen over the clay rooftops of Red Willow when the quiet of the village broke with a sound that made every heart pause for a breath. It was a sharp cry, not from pain alone, but from disbelief, the kind that echoed through the dusty lanes like a warning carried by the wind. Folks stepped out of their homes with slow, uncertain footsteps, knowing trouble in a frontier town rarely stayed small. Trouble grew fast out here, especially when pride and fear walked together. In the center of the street stood a young woman named Leora, heavy with child, and trembling from the shock of what had just happened. The morning mud still glistened from the dawn rain, thick and cold beneath her knees where she had fallen. Her dress was stained, her hands pressed in the dirt as she tried to steady herself. Across from her, breathing hard, stood her father Rylan, a man known across the valley for his strict ways and his temper carved from flint. No one understood why his hand had risen against her that morning, though whispers floated from porch to porch with guesses, ready to spread like brushfire. A handful of villagers watched in horror, some too afraid to interfere, some too used to the sight of Ryland's temper to expect anything different. Yet today felt different. Today, something in the air held a weight that no one could name. Leora tried to lift herself, only for her strength to betray her. Her breath shook as she pressed a hand against her stomach, waiting for the faintest movement she hoped to feel. A few women stepped forward but stopped when Ryland shot them a warning look. No one dared go against him. No one, except someone they never expected. Farther up the street, a tall Apache warrior named Taiga had been walking toward the trading post. His presence alone usually turned heads. Some feared him, some respected him, and a few pretended not to notice him at all. But Taiga noticed everything. He saw Leora collapse in the mud. He saw fear flicker across her face. He saw the villagers frozen in place, staring but doing nothing. And he saw Rylan. That was enough. The people of Red Willow knew. Taiga walked between two worlds. He traded with them, hunted near their lands, and kept to himself unless the situation called for something else. His silence was his shield, his pride steady as a mountain, and no one understood the full measure of the man behind the stern gaze. But that morning, as he looked at Leora, lying helpless on the ground, something in him shifted. He didn't hesitate. His steps were sure, grounded and filled with purpose as he crossed the muddy street. The villagers murmured among themselves, unsure whether to step aside or stand their ground. But the sight of him coming forward with that fierce calmness made everyone move. Even Ryland stiffened, his anger turning into something sharper, something he couldn't disguise. Taiga reached Leora and knelt beside her. For a moment, the entire town felt frozen in time. She blinked up at him, her lips parted in shock, eyes struggling to understand why a man she had barely spoken to was now the only one near enough to help her. Rainwater still dripped from his dark braid, and sunlight caught the red cloth tied around his head like a warrior's mark. Without saying a word, he offered his hand. Leora hesitated. People were staring. Her father was glaring. The mud was cold, fear was heavy, and her breath came in uneven pulls. But Taiga didn't rush her. He simply held his hand out, steady and strong. When she finally placed her hand in his, it felt like touching something certain in a world that had suddenly gone uncertain. He lifted her with a gentleness that startled everyone watching. The mud slipped from her dress as she rose, leaning on him for support, her other hand still guarding her unborn child. Taiga held her upright, steady as an oak, one arm around her back to keep her from falling again. A hush settled over the crowd. Even the chickens scratching near the fence went quiet. Children peered out from behind their mother's skirts, not understanding why a warrior from the nearby Apache band would come to the aid of a village woman who wasn't supposed to speak to him at all. Old men leaned forward from their porches, squinting as if they were witnessing something that would be spoken of for years. Taiga looked at Rylan, and though no words passed between them, the message was clear as day. Rylan tried to stand tall, but a flicker of shame crossed his hardened face. His hand, the one he had raised in anger, slowly dropped to his side. The villagers watched him, waiting for him to speak or step forward. But he didn't. For the first time in a long time, Rylan couldn't hide behind his pride. He couldn't undo what he had done. And he couldn't challenge the courage of the Apache, who had stepped in where no one else had. Leora's breath steadied as Taiga kept her close enough to keep her upright, but distant enough to honor her space. She whispered a soft thanks, her voice barely carrying in the still morning air. Taiga didn't respond with words. He simply nodded, as though helping her was the only natural thing to do. But the moment didn't end there. A tremor ran through her, sudden and sharp, causing her hand to clutch at her stomach again. She winced, but tried to hide it. Taiga felt the movement. He steadied her even more firmly, steadying her face with a look that pierced right through the layers of fear and shame she tried to hold inside. His jaw tightened with understanding. Something was wrong. A few villagers stepped closer now, their fear giving way to concern. Women whispered among themselves, wondering if the child was coming early or if the fall had harmed her. Men exchanged uneasy glances, knowing the morning had already taken a turn they weren't prepared for. Rylan took one stiff step toward them. Taiga's gaze stopped him in place. Not with anger, not with challenge, but with something far more powerful. Something that made the entire village hold its breath. Protectiveness. Taiga looked as though he had decided, right then and there, that Leora would not be harmed again. Not by the mud. Not by the fear gripping her heart. Not by the people who had failed to step in. The air grew tense as Leora felt another sharp pull in her stomach. Her breath hitched. Taiga shifted closer, his arm ready to bear her weight. The villagers waited for someone to speak, for someone to act, for someone to tell them what was really happening. But Leora could only hold on to Taiga's arm as the world began to blur around her. Taiga lowered his voice, calm and steady as a river on a quiet day. "Tell me where it hurts," Leora tried to answer, but the pain rippled again. Her fingers tightened around his arm. Taiga steadied her, lifting her weight from the mud as she swayed. The villagers watched, wide-eyed, as the Apache warrior held her in the center of the street. No one knew what was coming next. No one knew if her child was in danger or if the morning had changed her life forever. But they all knew one thing. This was no ordinary moment. This was the moment that would decide everything. And what happened next would shake the entire village of Red Willow. The street of Red Willow stayed frozen for a long moment, as if the whole town breathed through one pair of lungs. Leora steadied herself against Taiga's arm, trying to ignore the way her pulse hammered in her ears. The morning had begun with nothing more troubling than the ache of carrying new life. Now she stood at the center of the village, surrounded by staring eyes, her father silent behind her, and an Apache warrior holding her up as if fate itself had placed him there. Taiga guided her a step back from the cold mud, his hand firm yet gentle on her back. He could feel the tremor still running through her. Leora tried to speak, to explain what she felt, but the words tangled in her throat. The villagers waited, whispering under their breath, unsure if they should step closer or keep their distance. No one knew what caused the sudden pull in her stomach. Some women exchanged worried glances. Others murmured that perhaps she needed a midwife, but the midwife lived on the far end of the settlement, and no one dared make a move without knowing how Rylan would react. Rylan stood stiffly, his face pale beneath the rough stubble along his jaw. He seemed torn between shame and stubbornness, his pride fighting the truth that lay plain before everyone. He had struck his daughter, not in a hidden room, not in anger behind closed doors, but in the open street, where the sky itself bore witness. For a man like him, that was a wound deeper than anything he had delivered with his hands. Yet he said nothing. He only stared at Taiga with a mix of anger and something else, something he was not ready to name. Taiga ignored him. Instead, he looked down at Leora with the steady calm of someone who had walked through storms far worse than a man's pride. "Your breath is too fast," he said quietly. "Slow it." His voice was deep, grounding. Leora tried to listen, pulling air in through her nose and letting it out unevenly. Another tremor passed through her belly. She shut her eyes until it eased. When she opened them, Taiga was still there, watching her closely, not with fear, but with a strange certainty that made her chest tightened with something she didn't understand. The villagers watched the scene, their expressions shifting as the truth unfolded. For the first time, they seemed to realize that something far deeper than a single morning's fight lay beneath. Leora's trembling body and haunted eyes, and that truth began long before the rain touched the dust. Leora had lived her whole life in Red Willow. Her mother died when she was young, leaving her alone with a father who believed strength was the only thing worth teaching. Rylan was known for his rigid ways, the kind that made him respected and feared. He built his home with his own hands, raised livestock through droughts and storms, and expected nothing less than obedience from those under his roof. Leora grew up learning how to read the weather, patch a fence, lift more than most girls her age. But she also learned to swallow her hurt, hide her bruised pride, and keep her voice quiet when her father was angry. Even so, Leora never expected her life to twist the way it did. Months before, a traveler passing through Red Willow had charmed her with stories of distant plains, wide rivers, and places where the world did not feel so tight. His name had been Oren. He stayed only 2 weeks, but in those 2 weeks he filled her heart with a hope she had never felt. When he left, he promised to come back once he secured work in the northern towns. He never returned. Rylan discovered her pregnancy soon after. Instead of asking her what happened, instead of trying to understand, he assumed betrayal. He believed she had shamed their family. Rage clouded reason. The village whispered but did not intervene. It was easier to let a proud man handle his own home than risk standing against him. Only a few people knew. The full weight of Leora's burden, she carried it quietly. She worked as long as she could. She tried to keep her spirit steady. But as the months passed, the pressure in her father's house grew. And that morning, something in Rylan snapped. The argument started small. Then it rose too fast. His temper burst. Leora stumbled out the door, hoping to escape the storm inside. She didn't expect the blow that followed, or the mud, or the cold shock that stole her breath, and she never expected the Apache standing before her now to be the one to lift her out of it. Taiga had his own story, though few in Red Willow knew it. He came from the far ridge where his people lived in a scattered band, hunting elk and gathering herbs that most settlers didn't recognize. His father, a respected leader, had died during a harsh winter, leaving Taiga as the quiet strength of his family. Many settlers saw him as a reminder of the old conflicts between their worlds, though the last fight had ended years ago. But peace came with distance, not trust. Taiga never asked for trust. He only asked to be left to his work and his land. Yet he watched the settlers closely, measuring their hearts without speaking much. He had noticed Leora before, though never this close. Once at the well, where she struggled to lift a heavy bucket while hiding the strain in her shoulders. Another time at the trading post, where she laughed softly with the shopkeeper despite the sadness in her eyes. He saw more than most people realized, and he recognized the quiet sorrow she carried long before this morning. Now that sorrow trembled against his hand. "Hold steady," he murmured to her as her breath shook again. "Lean your weight on me if you need to." Leora nodded, trying to speak. "It hurts more than before," she whispered. "I fell too hard." Taiga's jaw tightened. He looked toward the group of women standing nearby, specifically at Honora, a midwife's apprentice known for her calm heart. She took a hesitant step forward, glancing at Rylan. Then back at Leora. Rylan's glare kept her frozen. Taiga felt Leora sway again and tightened his grip. His gaze moved once more to Rylan, this time sharpened with warning. Rylan straightened, but the strength in his eyes faltered. The villagers felt the air shift between the two men. Taiga did not need to raise his voice or lift a weapon. His silence alone carried the weight of a man who would not step aside. Finally, Nora gathered her courage and approached. She touched Leora's wrist gently. "You need to lie down," she said. "We should check the child." Leora nodded weakly. Another wave of discomfort tightened through her stomach. Her breath caught again. Taiga eased his arm under her knees, as if preparing to lift her, but he waited for her permission. She looked at him, surprised by his patience. She gave a slow nod. With careful strength, Taiga lifted her into his arms. The villagers gasped as the sight spread across the dusty street. Leora's dress, still damp from the mud, clung to her legs, and her dark hair stuck to her cheeks. But in Taiga's hold, she looked steadier than she had all morning. Rylan took a step forward, stopped when the entire village turned their eyes toward him. He felt the weight of their judgment now, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Unable to form the words, Taiga shifted Leora in his arms and nodded toward Honora. "Lead the way," said quietly. Honora hurried ahead, and Taiga followed with Leora held safely against him. The villagers parted as they passed, some whispering, some staring in awe, others wondering what power or destiny had driven an Apache, a warrior, to take charge in the center of their town. But behind those whispers, a deeper question stirred. Why did Taiga step forward so fast? Why did he look at Leora as though her pain touched a part of him he had kept hidden? Why did fate allow their paths to cross in such a moment, under a sky where light streamed like a blessing breaking through storm clouds? And as Taiga carried her toward the small berthing cabin at the edge of Red Willow, Leora felt the first spark of something she had not known in a long way. Time, safety, but the danger pressing. Closer around them was not done yet. And the truth that waited ahead would shake more than the morning calm. It would change. Every life in Red Willow. The berthing cabin stood a little apart from the rest of Red Willow, as if the town itself was unsure how close it wanted to stand to life or death. Weathered boards leaned together under a low roof, and a narrow window let in a tired stripe of daylight. Taiga carried Leora through the doorway, ducking his head as Honora pushed the door open ahead of them. The air inside smelled of sage, clean cloth, and old worry. Honora hurried to clear a small cot near the wall. "Set her here," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. Taiga lowered Leora gently, careful not to jar her. Leora winced once as she settled, then tried to relax her shoulders. The pain in her belly had steadied into a dull ache, but fear still sat heavy under her ribs. Outside, few villagers gathered by the door, murmuring and peeking in when they thought no one would notice. Word spread fast. By the time Taiga straightened, Red Willow was already reshaping its own story of what had happened, each tongue adding a little more to the tale. Some whispered that the Apache had placed a claim on her. Others said he must be paying off some unknown debt. A few shook their heads and muttered that nothing good came when two worlds tangled. Inside, Nora pressed her ear gently to Leora's belly and listened, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, she exhaled. "I can still hear the little one's heartbeat," she said. "Strong? That is good. But you need to rest. Any more shocks like that and we do not know what could happen." Relief washed over Leora, though it brought fresh tears. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. Taiga watched her and felt an unexpected stir in his chest. He had seen women endure hardship before, drought, hunger, loss, but something about the way she tried to hide her fear, even now, tugged at him in a way he did not welcome. Attachment brought danger. He knew that. Yet here he was. Honora glanced at Taiga. "You can go," she said softly. "I will stay with her." Taiga did not move. "Her father," he answered, his voice low. "Will he come here?" Nora hesitated. "He might. He is still her blood." Taiga's eyes darkened. Blood should protect. He looked toward the door. "Not throw her down where the pigs drink," Nora swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She had seen Rylan harsh before. She had never seen him lose himself in rage like he had that morning. The memory of his raised hand lingered in her mind like a stain on a white cloth. Leora shifted on the cot. "He did not mean for me to fall like that," she said quietly, though even she did not know if the words were true. Habit made her reach for excuses. "He is afraid. The child carries a shame he cannot name." Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling. "Or so he believes." Taiga turned back to her. "The child carries life," he replied. "Nothing else." His simple statement settled over the room, heavier than any sermon. Honora looked at him with new respect. Leora met his gaze and saw no judgment there, only a kind of fierce honesty that made her feel both naked and strangely safe. Before anyone could speak again, the door creaked open. Ryland stood framed in the doorway, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the floorboards. Behind him, a few villagers lingered, pretending they were only passing by. Taiga stepped slightly to the side, but did not move far. He remained close enough to reach Leora in a breath. Ryland's eyes flickered from his daughter to the Apache warrior. Shame and anger fought for space in his expression. "You can leave now," he said to Taiga, keeping his voice low but strained. "This is my family's matter." Taiga did not bow or lower his head like some men might have. He only answered with a calm that made Ryland's hands tighten into fists. "Your family's matter spilled into the street," Taiga said, "where all could see, where she fell, where your anger might have taken 2 lives instead of 1 mistake you already regret." The room went so quiet, even the wind seemed to listen. Ryland's jaw worked. He wanted to roar, to demand, to reclaim control of the moment. But the eyes of Red Willow were on him, even through the open door. Worse still, Leora's eyes were on him, full of hurt he could not bear to read. Honora stepped between them, trying to soften the edge of the moment. "What matters now is that she rests," she said. "The child is still strong, but we cannot risk more strain." Elon looked at his daughter. His voice dropped. "Are you hurt?" "I am tired," Leora answered, forcing calm. "I am frightened, but the baby is still here." She touched her belly with a quiet, protective gesture. Her words pierced Ryland's armor. He looked older in that instant, as if the lines on his face had been carved deeper by regret. "I lost my temper," he said, the admission barely more than a breath. "I saw the life inside you and thought of all that might be lost. The farm, our name, everything I built with these hands." He glanced down at his calloused fingers, then at the mud still dried along his boots. "I forgot that you are not just my fear. You are my daughter." Taiga watched him closely. The apology was clumsy and incomplete, but it was something. Still, it did not erase what had been done or the risks that remained. Outside, another figure approached the cabin. Grayson, the town's informal peacekeeper, leaned near the doorway, hat low over his eyes. He had served years in distant forts and knew both Apache and settler ways better than most. When trouble brewed, he usually stood at the center of it. Trying to keep the valley from tearing itself apart, he cleared his throat. "Rylan," he said, nodding toward the man. "Taiga, Honora." His eyes swept the room, weighing the strain in the air. "I need a word with you all. There is talk growing outside, and if we do not guide it, that talk will guide us instead." Honora glanced at Leora, who nodded faintly. "Go," Leora said. "I'll be all right for a little while." Taiga did not like leaving her, but he understood the need. Conflict was no longer just inside one house. It was spreading through the village like a dark cloud. He stepped outside with the others, leaving Honora's assistant to sit by Leora's side. The small yard in front of the cabin was crowded now. Women held baskets half forgotten. Men leaned on fence posts with tight jaws. A group of children hovered near a water barrel, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The story of the morning had twisted into something larger, the way stories often did on the frontier. Grayson raised his hand. "Listen," he called out, "one at a time. You all know me. I do not like shouting more than any of you, but we have a pregnant woman inside and an old anger outside, and the two do not mix well." A murmur rolled through the crowd, then quieted. An older settler, named Corvin, spoke first. "We cannot have Apache warriors carrying our women through the street," he said, stirring the air with his cane. "It will invite trouble. Their band will think we cannot tend our own. Next thing we know, they decide they are the protectors of Red Willow." A younger man answered sharply. "And we were doing such a fine job, letting a woman get struck like that in front of us." He jerked his chin toward Rylan. No one moved until Taiga did. Rylan flushed, shame burning through him again. Grayson noticed and stepped in. "This is not a trial," he said firmly. "This is a town trying to keep itself together. If we turn this into Apache against settler, we forget the center of what happened. A man lost his temper. A woman was hurt. A child is at risk. That is our truth today. Another villager, Mara, folded her arms. Truth is, some folks already did not trust the Apache near our homes, she said. Now he carries one of our own. What will people say in the next town over? They might think we have no rules in Red Willow. Grayson met her gaze. Maybe they will say we let a man of honor help someone in need. Or maybe they will twist it into whatever shape makes them feel safer, he sighed. Fear has its own tongue. Taiga listened, silent but alert. He knew the balance between his people and the settlers was fragile. His band traded meat and herbs for tools and grain. They shared the valley, if not entirely by choice. Any rumor that he had overstepped could ripple back to his own camp. To his younger brother Rail and the elders who guarded the ways of their people as if summoned by his thoughts, a slim rider appeared at the far edge of the road. It was Rail himself, guiding a paint horse with easy skill. He slid from the saddle near the crowd, his dark eyes already sharp with unease. Word reached the ridge fast. Rail said to Taiga, "They say you lifted a settler woman in front of her own people," as if claiming her. His tone was not accusing, but it carried deep concern. Some villagers stiffened at the sight of another Apache. Grayson lifted a hand again, reminding them to stay calm. Taiga stepped toward his brother. "I claimed her safety," he answered. "Nothing more. She carried a child and lay in the mud while her own father stood over her. My feet moved before my thoughts did." Rail studied him. "In your heart?" he asked quietly. Taiga did not answer. Rail's gaze slid toward the cabin. "Elders worry," he said. "They remember when settlers broke promises, when warriors bled for ground that now hosts their barns. If they hear you are tying your life to one of them, they will fear the past returning." Grayson, catching the drift of their exchange even without every word, stepped closer. "No one is tying any lives together yet," he said. "We are trying to keep one from slipping away." But the hint had already reached the ears of the crowd. Whispers rose again. The notion of an Apache and a village woman bound by more than chance stirred old fears and hidden curiosity. Some looked at Taiga with suspicion. Others looked with a strange kind of hope they did not dare name. Ryland's face hardened. "My daughter already carries one shame," he said. "I will not see another laid upon her. No talk of her belonging to any man. Not the traveler who left her with child. Not an Apache who steps into business that is not his." Taiga's eyes flashed. "Her safety is my business," he replied. "I saw her fall. I heard her cry. That is enough claim for any man with a soul." He took a breath, tamping down the anger rising in his chest. "But I do not seek to own her. I seek to stand where no one else would." The words struck the crowd with quiet force. Some looked away, ashamed they had hesitated when he had not. Inside the cabin, Leora lay listening to the muffled rise and fall of voices outside. Each swell of sound made her heart beat faster. She pressed her hand over her stomach, whispering words meant for the child alone. "You hold on," she murmured. "No matter what they say out there, you hold on." Nora came to sit beside her. "They are arguing," Leora said. "They are trying to decide what kind of people they wish to be," Honora replied. "Sometimes that sounds the same as arguing." Leora gave a faint, tired smile that faded quickly. "If they choose wrong," she said, "the cost will be mine." Back outside, the air grew colder, though the sun still stood high. Grayson stepped to the center of the yard again. "We have two choices," he said. "We can let fear of old battles rule this place. Or we can admit that today, an Apache warrior acted with more courage than most of us." He looked at Rylan, "And we can decide what kind of father stands at your door. One who clings to pride or one who walks inside and faces the hurt he caused." Rylan's throat worked as he swallowed. The whole town seemed to lean toward him, waiting for his answer. Rail watched Taiga, wondering which way his brother's path would bend. The wind carried the faint sound of Leora's voice from inside, though no one could make out the words. In that charged moment, every choice hung in the balance. The future of a child. The fragile peace between Apache and settler. The fate of Red Willow itself. Ryland drew a long breath and stepped toward the door. Taiga moved at the same time, matching his pace, The townsfolk watched as the two men, bound now by a single act that morning, reached for the same doorknob, and no one knew which hand would open it. First, Rylan and Taiga reached the cabin door at the same time, their hands brushing the wood together. The moment froze, the air around them, stretching it tight like a pulled wire. Villagers leaned in, breaths held, unsure if the next sound would be a shout, a fight, or something far quieter yet far more dangerous. Even the horses tied along the fence tossed their heads nervously. Picking up the shift in the ground beneath all of Red Willow, Rylan's fingers curled around the doorknob first. But Taiga did not step back. He remained steady, his dark gaze locked on Rylan's face, measuring the man not by his temper but by his next choice. Rylan's chest rose in a shaky breath. He was used to standing above others, used to his voice carrying weight. But facing Taiga, he sensed something different. This was not a man who could be threatened or pushed aside with pride. Taiga's strength was rooted deeper, like stone beneath soil. With a strained exhale, Rylan pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in the quiet, and warm air from inside spilled over both men. Rylan stepped in first, but Taiga followed closely, not willing to give more distance than Leora's safety allowed. Inside the cabin, the dim lights softened the rough edges of the room. Leora lay on the cot, her face pale, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Honora hovered nearby, wringing a cloth between her fingers. When she saw the two men enter, her shoulders straightened, ready to intervene if voices rose too high. Leora's eyes flicked toward the door. When she saw her father and Taiga together, something like fear and hope tangled inside her chest. She tried to sit up, but winced. Taiga moved first, steadying her gently without taking his eyes off Rylan. The quiet room tightened again, every heartbeat crisp in the stillness. Rylan stepped forward, stopping only a few feet from his daughter. His shadow stretched across the floor, toward her, long and heavy. "Leora," he said softly, his voice lower than it had been in years. "I should have come sooner," she swallowed, unable to trust her own voice. Her father never apologized. Not once in all her years. Hearing him now sent a wave of uncertainty through her. Rylan ran a hand over his face. "I know what I did in the street. I cannot take it back. I saw fear in your eyes and knew I had put it there." He looked at the mud still drying on his hands. "I failed you." The words hung there, fragile and unexpected. Before Leora could respond, another tremor rippled through her stomach. She gasped and pressed her hand to her side. Honora rushed in, checking her again with careful hands. "It is stronger now," she said, her voice tight. "The fall may have done more than we hoped." Rylan's face drained of color. "Is the child in danger?" "Not yet," Honora said. "But the pain is coming sooner and sharper. She must stay calm, and she must not be alone." Taiga moved closer to Leora's side. His presence steadied the room the way a mountain steadies the horizon. Leora grasped his wrist without thinking, grounding herself as another wave of discomfort rolled through her. Her fingers tightened, and Taiga lowered his head slightly. Murmuring a few soft words in his native tongue to calm her breath, Rylan saw their closeness and flinched. But he did not speak. Not yet. Outside voices grew louder. Grayson tried to keep the crowd controlled, but tension spread faster than water through dry earth. Whispers of Apache raids from old battles resurfaced. Others muttered about broken promises and bloodshed decades past. The presence of Rail near the edge of the yard sharpened the unease even more. Some villagers feared his band would come if anything happened to Taiga. The valley remembered old scars too well. Inside, Leora tried to focus on each breath, listening to the muffled rise of voices beyond the walls. "They are fighting out there," she whispered. "Because of me. Because of all of us," Taiga corrected gently. "Because their hearts do not know where to stand yet." Rylan let out a hard sigh. "Let them shout. Let them blame me if they want," his voice cracked. "But they will not blame you." The vulnerability in his words startled Leora. For years she had carried the quiet ache of wanting her father's protection, even when he was the source of her fear. Hearing him now felt like a door creaking open after a lifetime. But that door did not erase what had happened. Nor did it ease the storm outside. Grayson suddenly burst through the cabin door, his face drawn tight. "We have trouble," he said, shutting the door behind him. "Some folks think the Apache band might come looking for Taiga. They fear a crossing of lines that could spark trouble. And with Leora in here, that fear is growing." Ryland's jaw tightened. "This is my fault," he muttered. "No," Grayson said. "This is a valley full of people who don't know how to sit still when old ghosts wake up." Rail stepped into view behind Grayson at the door. His expression was unreadable. "I did not bring trouble," he said calmly. "But trouble rises when people look too long at shadows instead of truth." Grayson stepped aside to allow him in. Ryland stiffened, but did not lunge. The tension between Apache and settler hung thick, almost visible. Rail looked at Leora, then at Taiga. His voice softened. "The elders heard only rumors. They fear you may have tied your spirit to hers. Some think it is a claim. Others think it is a mistake that will bring hardship on both sides." Taiga met his brother's gaze. "I tied nothing," he said. "I followed the call of a life in danger. That is all." Rail tilted his head. "Is that truly all?" Taiga did not answer. Leora's breath hitched. Ryland looked between the two brothers, his suspicion rising again. Honora cleared her throat. "Talking about spirits and ties will not help her right now. What matters is that she stays calm." She looked at Grayson. "Can the crowd be sent home?" Grayson shook his head. "They are too riled up. They want answers for questions they barely understand. We need to show them we have control here." Ryland squared his shoulders. "Then let them hear it from me," he said. "Let them hear that I was wrong, that I hurt my own child, and that Taiga saved her." He swallowed hard. "They will listen to me if I tell the truth." Taiga stepped forward. "If you go out there alone, they will twist your words from fear. Let me stand with you." For a moment, Ryland searched Taiga's eyes as if measuring the worth of that offer. Then he nodded once. Honora touched Leora's arm. "You stay here," she whispered. "Save your strength." Leora nodded, though fear curled inside her. She watched as her father and Taiga walked side by side toward the door. Two men from two different worlds, stepping into a storm they did not start, but now had to face. Grayson followed them, ready to keep order. Rail stayed inside, understanding that the crowd outside needed fewer triggers, not more. As the door opened, the sound of raised voices swept in like a cold wind. Leora's heart pounded. She reached for Taiga's hand before he stepped fully outside. He paused and looked back at her. She gave his fingers a small squeeze, fear and trust woven together. He answered with a nod, then let her hand slip away. Outside, the village yard was packed. Men with clenched fists, women with worried faces, young boys trying to look brave. A few horses stomped nervously. The dust kicked up in restless swirls. Ryland stepped forward first. The crowd quieted a bit, waiting. "I wronged my daughter," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "That is the truth. I let fear take hold of me. Taiga did what none of us did. He stepped forward to protect her, when I was the reason she needed protecting." A wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd. Corvin shook his head. "Yet you stand beside the Apache now." "What does that say?" Ryland's voice rose. "It says that a man who protects my daughter deserves my respect." The crowd reacted sharply. Some were swayed. Some were angered. Old prejudices clawed upward. Taiga stepped beside Ryland now, tall and steady. Silence followed. "I want no fight," Taiga said. "I do not seek your anger. I do not want your land. I want her safe." His voice carried a calm weight that commanded attention. "Do not bring old battles to her door?" A sudden shout burst from the back of the crowd. "Then why is your brother here? Why are more of you coming?" Rail stepped forward inside the doorway, visible but not outside. He spoke clearly. "I came because the valley speaks fast. I came alone. No warriors follow. We do not want war with you," another man shouted. "But if Taiga takes her as claim, what then?" Taiga's breath tightened. He almost answered, but a cry cut through the air before he could speak. Low it was sharp.
Oh.
Strained, filled with pain. Everyone turned. Honora burst through the doorway. The pains are worsening. Something is happening. Fear shattered the crowd's tension like a stone splitting ice. Rylan rushed inside. Taiga followed, his breath quickening. The villagers trailed close behind, uncertain yet drawn by the urgency. Leora lay trembling on the cot, her breath erratic, her hands gripping the blankets. Sweat beaded her forehead. Honora knelt beside her, panic flickering behind her calm facade. "She is too early," Honora whispered. "Something is wrong." The room spun as Rylan fell to his knees beside his daughter. Grayson hovered at the doorway. Rael watched silently, sensing the moment shifting into something greater than fear or conflict. Taiga moved to Leora's side, his hands steady even as his heart pounded. "Stay with me," he said softly. She opened her eyes, searching his face through the pain. Outside, the storm of fear quieted. Inside, a different kind of storm gathered, and the next breath in that little cabin would decide everything still. Hanging by a thread, Leora's cry pulled every breath out of the cabin, leaving the room suspended in a painful stillness before voices and movement rushed in to fill the space again. Honora acted first, guiding Leora's trembling hands down and steadying her shoulders. Taiga stepped close, placing his palm against her back to help her sit upright. Rylan pressed his forehead to her hand, whispering words she had not heard from him since she was a child. Grayson stood guard at the door, keeping the crowd from pushing inside. Rael moved closer, but stayed quiet, understanding that the room held something sacred in that moment. Leora gasped through another wave of pain. "I cannot," she whispered, gripping Tiga's wrist with such strength his knuckles paled. Tiga leaned closer. "You can," he answered, calm and sure. "You already have. You survived a fall. You survived fear. Now breathe." His words, simple yet steady, washed over her like warm water over cold hands. Honora checked her again, then looked up with a mixture of relief and urgency. "The child is coming," she said. "It is early, but not too early. If she keeps her strength, the baby will come safe." Rylan's breath broke with emotion. He wiped his face. "I will not leave this time," he murmured, taking Leora's other hand. For a moment, the old hurts, the pride, the anger, and the mistakes faded. All that remained was a father trying to stay steady in a moment that demanded everything from him. Outside, the villagers quieted. News spread quickly that the child was coming. The arguing melted into a hush as people realized this moment was bigger than ancient grudges or fearful whispers. Honora leaned over Leora. "When the next pain comes, listen to me. We will get through this slow and steady. No rushing." "No fear?" Leora nodded, though worry shook her voice. "Is the baby strong enough?" Nora smiled gently. "Strong enough to give you a message right now," she said. "This child wants to see the world." The next wave came harder than the last, but this time Leora was not alone. Taiga anchored her from behind, holding her steady as she bore down with a cry that filled the room. Rylan whispered encouragement. Honora guided her through each breath. Even Rael stood by the foot of the cot, watching with a solemn respect that softened the tension in his face. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Sweat beaded Leora's forehead, and her breath shook with exhaustion. Every part of her ached, but she did not let go of Tiga's wrist or her father's hand. She fought through every wave of pain with a fire none of them had seen in her before. Finally, Nora looked up, her face brightening. "I see the child," she said. "You are almost there." Leora gathered all the strength left inside her. She pushed through one final wave, shouting as the tension broke. Then the room fell into a moment of pure, aching stillness. A heartbeat later, baby's cry filled the cabin. It was small, but mighty, carrying the sound of life renewed. Relief washed over everyone. Rylan fell onto his knees with his hands over his face. Taiga let out a long breath he did not realize he had been holding. Honora laughed through tired tears as she wrapped the baby in a soft cloth. "It is a boy," she said. "Strong lungs. Strong heart." She placed the tiny bundle into Leora's trembling arms. Leora looked down at her son, and tears streamed freely from her eyes. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice thin with wonder. You held on. The baby quieted as if recognizing her. His small fingers curled around hers, and everything in the room softened into peace. Taiga moved to sit beside her. Leora looked at him with gratitude so deep it felt like something older than the morning. Older than fear, older than the valley itself. "You saved us," she said softly. Taiga shook his head. "You saved yourself," he answered. "I only stood where I was needed." Rylan rose from his knees and sat at Leora's side. His hands trembled as he touched the baby's head. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "And I am sorry for every moment I let fear speak louder than love." Leora leaned her head against his shoulder. "We move forward now," she said. "No more turning back." Rylan nodded, tears wetting his beard. "Forward," he repeated. Outside, the villagers waited for news. When Grayson stepped from the cabin and announced that mother and child were safe, a wave of relief rippled across the yard. The tension that had held the town in a chokehold loosened all at once. Men shook hands. Women wiped tears. Children laughed, suddenly free of the fear that had hung over them. But the greatest shift came when Taiga stepped out with the baby in his arms, so Leora could rest. A hush fell as villagers saw him standing there, holding the newborn with the gentleness of a man who understood the weight of new life. Corvin, who had shouted the loudest earlier, moved forward. He removed his hat, cleared his throat, and said, "If he trusts you with his first breath, then maybe we should trust you too." Taiga nodded once. "I want no claim on what is yours," he said, "but I will protect what I see in danger." Grayson stepped beside him. "Then let this be the new truth in Red Willow," he said. "We choose peace, not fear. We choose community, not division." A few villagers nodded, then a few more. Soon, the crowd agreed, with quiet murmurs, recognizing that the valley had changed that day, not through force, but through courage and compassion. Back inside, Leora rested while Honora cleaned the room. Rylan sat by the cot with the air of a man who had finally let his armor fall. Taiga returned the baby to Leora and stood nearby, unsure whether to stay or step out. Leora looked up at him. "You do not have to leave," she said. "Not now. Not after everything." Taiga hesitated. "Your father may not wish me here." Rylan looked up, meeting Taiga's steady gaze. "You lifted my daughter from the mud when I was frozen by my own pride," he said. "You saved 2 lives today. If anyone belongs here at this moment, it is you." Taiga nodded, humbled in a way he did not expect. Rael stepped forward then. "The elders will need to know what happened," he said. "But when they hear that you saved a woman and a child, and that peace held here today, they will not speak of battle." Taiga placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Tell them the truth." Rael nodded and stepped out to return to the ridge, as the sun dipped low beyond the clay roofs. The cabin filled with the warm glow of evening. Leora held her son close, smiling as he slept. Rylan sat on one side of the cot, Taiga on the other. The silence was gentle, not strained. Comfortable, not fearful. Leora looked between them and whispered, "His name will be Kalen." Both men nodded in approval. Taiga glanced at the window where the sky blazed orange and gold. "He will grow strong," he said. "Stronger than the shadows that tried to keep him from this world." Rylan exhaled deeply. "And I will be the father he deserves," he said. "Not the man I was this morning." Leora squeezed his hand. "We begin again," she whispered. Outside, Red Willow settled into a rare peace. The villagers returned to their homes with softened hearts. Grayson sat by the cabin door as a quiet guard, though the valley itself felt safe for the first time in years. Inside, Taiga watched mother and child with a steady gaze that held respect, hope, and something deeper that he did not speak. He knew this day would reshape their futures, though none of them could yet see where the path would lead. Leora rested her head back against the pillows, knowing she was safe. Kalen breathed softly against her chest. Warm and alive, for the first time in a long while, Leora felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a promise carved from kindness, courage, and the strength of unexpected allies. and as the last light of day spilled through the window, Red Willow welcomed a new beginning.